afternoon, everyone, in sunny London, of course, and a big hello to everyone joining us from across the globe. This is At Pace, your people and culture talk show. I'm your host, Jonathan Rodrigues, and we have a fantastic conversation lined up for you. I want to start with an apology, though. I know that we had suggested, and our host has suggested that we are in a studio. Unfortunately, we are not. We're still in our homes, and we've turned our lovely corners into studios of their own. But this is fantastic, isn't it? We get a chance to be on one platform across multiple time zones and discuss matters that are universal and quite relatable, no matter where we are actually. And that's exactly what we hope to achieve with our pace, to give you an unrehearsed, unabashed, unfiltered perspective on trending disputes, trending workplace culture news that's taking place around us. And we got an exciting lineup of guests who will share their sincere opinions and insights based on practical, hands on experiences and learnings from their professional lives. Joining us today are David Liddle, Mary Brown, and Nicki Eyre. And I'm going to take turns to quickly introduce you to each of them. I know they have long, winding series, and I do not have time for that today, but they're all very, very active on LinkedIn, and I urge you to go and follow them as soon as we are done with this talk show. David is the CEO and founder of the TCM Group and the president of the Institute of Organization Dynamics. He describes himself, of course, as a lifelong mediator, but a lot of what he does today goes beyond the traditional mediation boundaries and practice. And it would be more appropriate to actually describe him as a transformational culture architect. David's latest book, Transformational Culture, is rocking the top shelf of bookstores right now. And if you haven't got a copy of that, I would certainly recommend that for a summer reading. David, first of all, a very happy 21st birthday to the TCM team, and welcome to the show.
Jonathan, it's fantastic to be here. Great to be here on our inaugural At Pace videocast as well. Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you. Nicki is a founder and managing director at Conduct Change, where she engages as a consultant, trainer, coach, and international speaker on workplace bullying. Nicki has been strongly campaigning for formal recognition of workplace bullying as a problem that injures individuals and damages organizations. A lot of work that she and her colleagues do is actually showcased at the United Nations Workplace Bullying that takes place every month. For that as well, and probably Nicki will throw some light on that during the course of this conversation. She's a good friend of the TCM group and has actually recorded a fantastic webinar, a video cast with David a few months ago. So if you want to check that out, you will have to log in as a member at the Organization Dynamics Institute. And I will share the website details with you very, very soon. Thank you for joining us, Nicki, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here today.
And last but not the least, Mary joins us. And she's a writer, speaker, mediator, and philosopher based in Martin, Tennessee. She taught philosophy for 23 years before being bitten by the mediation bug. As the TCM group begins to make windfall in America, Mary plays a huge role as a transformation consultant there. Check out her podcast titled Conflict Managed. Mary, I know it's 6:30 in the morning for you. Thank you for doing this and welcome to the show.
So glad to be here.
Awesome. Let's get rolling, shall we? Our first theme for today is the future of workplace disputes. I'm just going to share with you a bit of a clipping so we get context to what we're talking about. And in no light, I wasn't trying to pitch Musk against Chesky. I know those are two different individuals, but just to bring out the context of one leader saying get back to the office and the other leader who's, of course, the CEO of Airbnb, who says that the office is now over. So the theme is primarily inspired, of course, by Musk's ultimatum to Tesla employees, where he reportedly asked them to either get back to office or they would have to leave. And it seems to me, and it comes across to me as something quite desperate and quite insecure from Musk's side. And I want to get to dissect, it's offline, online workplace mode in some time. And we'll get to that, in due course of time. But I just want to know from you, what are your initial thoughts on this kind of messaging from a leadership management viewpoint? And how does this come across, to someone who's reading this or is watching this?
Shall I start off there, Jonathan? So, I mean, to me, these big statements, the office is there, get back to the office, reflects the sort of duality and these opposing positions. And of course, the reality for a great many organisations is it's neither one nor the other. I think if we're looking at sort of post-COVID, post-pandemic working environment, what we're actually finding is we have what I think of as a broadly have your cake and eat it strategy. Is, we can get the best out of being in the workplace when we needed to be in the workplace, but we can also have the focus time at home, being able to work from home, working flexibly, and all that brings. And to me, absolutely in the middle of these two big, entrepreneurial giants and two big, technical and industrial giants, to me is common sense in the middle. And in that meeting place is hybrid working. And I think for leaders and managers in organizations, getting the best from a hybrid environment is about listening to our employees, understanding what their needs are, where they overlap with the needs of the organization, and where, of course, there's divergence. And hybrid working is a really powerful way, in my view, of creating a really positive, progressive future workplace whereby everybody can contribute, everyone can be the best version of themselves, and we can work in a way which is meeting our own individual needs and the needs of organizations. And I think for many employees and workers in organizations, that's exactly what they need from their workplaces. And a failure to deliver that, I think, is what's really underpinning the great resignation and the great retirement as we're seeing it right now. And people are rejecting the get back to the office or the office is dead, big polarity, polarizing positional language in favor of a more nuanced, human-centered, person-driven, purpose-focused, values-oriented approach. So I think the answer sits firmly in the middle of these two individuals now.
Yeah, I agree. I think, if you have clear expectations and you have clear job descriptions, then I think you're able to look at your workforce and say, what are we trying to accomplish, right? Given what our jobs are, and then who are the people that are populating those jobs, so that we can figure out what is best for the organization and then the people within those organizations. So I think it starts with being very clear as to what you're doing and then what is required. If you're on the line, if you're making tires, well, you're not hybrid, right? And I noticed that, Musk said, everyone back to the office for solidarity. The people on the line putting the cars together have to be there, and so should we. And I'm all for solidarity. But solidarity, I don't think, means being in the same space together, or it doesn't have to be that, right? So what is solidarity? How can we make our workplaces fair and just, high performing for all the people? Well, does the accounting office need to be physically present? If you were to ask somebody on the line, what does solidarity mean to you, seeing the accountant sit in their desk across the space, or maybe the money that is saved for those people not being there or being there in a hybrid fashion, if we put that into your paycheck, right? So, I think there's a lot of ways in which we can really be one organization, even though we have different roles. And therefore, it's all about particularity. Like, how do you care for people? You don't care for people, you care for individuals, right? And so individuals within an organization, if we are clear about what the organization is doing and then specifically what the roles are of those people in the organization.
Yeah, Nicki, I hope I'm not derailing you from your thought process, but also with regards to what Mary just said and about solidarity. I think I want to kind of drive the conversation also towards this debate about a threat. An ultimatum is almost like a threat versus an invitation. And how the change in the way I think the message is sent across to a workforce, it could have been slightly different, and it could have been more of an invitation more than a threat. And I'm pretty sure there has been a timeline how it started with human HR and kind of escalated to a threat. It started probably with an invitation, but what's our role as well, and how can that be prevented? How can a simple invite be prevented from escalating into a threat or an ultimatum? And can leaders check on that?
Yeah, I was just losing you a little bit there, Jonathan, but in terms of the wording, the language that we use, it's so important, because actually what we have to think about is not just the message that we're giving, but how it's being received. I completely agree with all the points that David and Mary have brought up there. And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because as human beings, we are social creatures. We need that human connection. And therefore, being back in the office is positive in that sense. But our working practices have got to the stage where they are, the long commutes, the long hours, they're actually making us less productive. So what a fantastic opportunity to say, this isn't working. And as a leader to say, wow, we've got a real opportunity for change here. So I think it's really interesting. So the office is dead. Maybe the office in the traditional sense that we know it, of everybody being there all the time, is dead. But actually, there is a need for people to come together. But as Mary said, you don't see all of the people all of the time. So that's not necessarily looking at it in terms of everybody being in the same space. So I think that's a really important message as well. But certainly, when we start putting ultimatums out, then you are going to alienate people. Straight away, you will alienate your workforce. And right now, the workforce have got more choice than they have had in a long, long time. And to actually just kind of go out there and say, it's back to the office or nothing, you could say straight away, well, actually, just going against every kind of legal process as well in that. But actually, you've got to really think about it. Having said all that, if you think about what Musk is like as an individual, he's very creative. Now, the creativity, when you're in a room with people, that energy, feeding on that energy is so important. So I can also understand how somebody like that, who is full of ideas, likes to have the people around him. So I think there's there's different aspects, but there's those personal preferences coming in as well to this. I'll let someone else get
it's an interesting one about, because if you look at Musk's interest in Twitter and an understanding, therefore, of sort of social media and how we get our fellowship and engagement through social channels and through digital spaces, one would also, and I agree with you, Nicki, but I also think you can create some really powerful spaces for collaboration and fellowship and positive engagement through digital technologies. And I think, to me, the message of get back to the workspace, whatever that workspace might be, or get out, to me, misses the opportunity to think innovatively and creatively about creating spaces where we, and as you rightly say, as human beings, as social animals, can come together and engage. And that's where I think the smart money is for our leaders and managers and others in our organizations, is finding creative solutions to these new problems. And my concern after COVID is that we're just going to, like an elastic band, snap back to how things were. But I don't think that's going to work for people. I think they're rejecting those tired old working models and paradigms. And it creates a really challenging environment, I think, where people are going to start pushing back against managers and leaders and demanding a new and better way of working. And we can see that happening here in the UK with our industrial relations challenges that we're experiencing right now today on our railways and looking elsewhere. So people are now demanding different, demanding better. And it does mean that our leaders and managers need to be equipped with using these a lot and really listening and thinking creatively about how they create a workspace where we can thrive in this new normal, whatever that might look like for whatever working environment that might be.
Yeah, and when you throw in the cost of living increases, the cost of petrol and commuting as well, then there are so many different aspects to take into account at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Massive. It's a massive issue.
It seems
Let's
like
go back on Nicki's point actually about the personal aspect of this, and there are insights and opinions being floating around the internet that this was just an excuse for him to lay off a workforce that he was not comfortable having there, and that could probably be the trick about it. But I think also for, and coming back to Chesky and Musk, two different opinions, two very polarized opinions of what the future of the workspace looks like. This uncertainty, this uncertainty continues to exist the third year of the pandemic now. What do you think are the psychological implications of this on the workforces? And I know that three of you work very closely with organizations and companies, and you must be getting a lot of feedback about this and how it's affecting workplace culture. This uncertainty of, are we coming back to the workplace? Are we going to be at home? Because a lot of people have also invested in making their homes, suitable and feasible for them to continue working. So I wonder if you got any feedback from that perspective as well. Mary, I see you nodding.
Oh, well, it seems to me that with this uncertainty that people have, of course, they're looking to the leadership, right? And unfortunately, there's certainly in the States, there are huge problems with HR, with a culture of litigation, with complete lack of psychological safety. What is going on? So lack of communication and empathy in jobs. And I was thinking about hybrid, and some reasons that people don't want their workers to work remotely has to do with feeling like they don't know how to manage, right? Sometimes it's a lack of trust, but I think the lack of trust just is because they don't know how to manage a remote workforce. And why should they know how to do that? But I think the good news is that that's a skill set that can be learned. And as David pointed to his ears earlier, it starts with listening. What's going on? What are people enjoying? What's working? What's not working? Looking at productivity and talking about vision and passion. And there's so many different skills. And I think that helps every worker to be listened to, but also communicated with in a real dialogue where the manager doesn't have all the answers and neither does the worker, and they work together. And so I do see this great opportunity with whatever the workforce looks like. And I think it really does depend on the industry and what people are trying to accomplish. And I think it should be fluid. But there are these opportunities to learn new skill sets that many management doesn't have or aren't very strong in the first place. But I think it's an opportunity for organizations to really reach out and find those continuing education and opportunities for their managers to get comfortable with the future.
I'll completely agree with that. It's a great opportunity to be creative and innovative. I think the successful organizations of the future, measured in terms of attracting and retaining talent, which is a massive issue in the war for talent, attracting and retaining the investment funds and capital into the organization, and attracting and retaining customers, are those organizations who are going to be super agile, really engaging positively with their employees, their customers, their other stakeholders, and having this powerful conversation where the managers and leaders and HR are there to support and serve the needs of those people within the organization to drive business success, rather than that formal, rigid, bureaucratic, overly structured environment which compresses people and prevents people from shining and being their most brilliant selves. So I think the workplace is changing beyond all recognition, and I think that debate that you've set up there, Jonathan, I think really marks that really clearly.
Yeah, and I think this is something that's going to be continued to be debated over the next 6 to 12 months. This is not, period is not just going to go away. And I think it's a very interesting time to actually look out there and check in on all the feedback that we are receiving, with this whole hybrid mode getting into it. I actually want to slightly deviate into something that's also quite relevant to, this hybrid work modes, and that is kind of having a space for those of us who are immunocompromised. And this is very interesting because according to this report in the BBC, it says in the US, the number of people who are immunocompromised around 3%, while in the UK, it's actually just 0.7%. So they are obviously a minority and do not have a voice out there to fight for themselves. And they are faced in this storm of an ultimatum. You either come to office or you will have to resign or you lose your job. And this is just one section of people. And I think in time there will be other sections of people who are going to find it difficult to get back to work. So
Absolutely.
I think if we can spend the next couple of minutes, and what would your advice be to someone who really cannot get back there to the office for whatever reasons? And because I know there might be a lot of viewers joining us today who are also struggling with the situation, and how should they address this? How should they address this fact that it's going to be difficult for them to get back to the workplace because they've invested so much in being at home and doing this, and at the same time, of course, this is becoming more financially uh, feasible for them. How would you kind of advise them in this kind of situation?
Get out. I mean, I thought, sorry, I'd be the sorry, Nicki, but you go ahead, actually, Nicki. But it's like,
No, you go.
I mean, why work in an environment where they're going to put you at risk of harm? I mean, it's just for what? To sit in an office where you're not as productive as you would be. You know, the labour market conditions have never been more favourable to employees. I mean, sometimes obviously it is harder to move jobs. It is harder, but I read a great post many years ago. We're not trees, we can move. You know, we have to look after ourselves, and if our organisations are not looking after ourselves, go and find an organisation who is. And there are organisations out there who are driven by a clear sense of purpose, a clear sense of values and principles, and a clear sense of being centred around your needs, not just a set of rigid, old-fashioned, tired and dreary needs that really relate back to some business model from the 1980s. So, I mean, I know it's not necessarily easy and some people can't get out, but I would be going out to my local recruitment consultants and job pages and finding alternative employment for a company who takes my health and well-being far more seriously than the organisations who are demanding depressed people coming back into the workplace. For me, get out. But sorry, Nicki, I know you were going to.
That's all right. I wasn't going to stop that flow of energy there.
David's basically going with the theme of you can't fire me, I quit.
Well, exactly, but you've got to look after your health and well-being. I mean, it's organisations can be stressful. You talk about psychological safety. I mean, it can be stressful and difficult enough at the best of times. They can be challenging and hard places to work within. If we're in an environment where, because of my immunity and to COVID or any other factor in relation to my mental health or physical health and well-being, then the organisation's putting me at risk, that organisation does not have my best interest at heart. That is a mismatch between the needs of the individual employee and the organisation. And that, to me, says find somewhere that, because there are organisations who are better than that, and they will treat you better than that. So go and find them, because there's a lot of them out there. And I mean,
I'm going to jump in now. I think one of the things about being immunocompromised is that it's probably something that you haven't necessarily shared with your employer. It's not about sharing a disability, a registered disability. This is about private medical information that you are then going to have to go in and share with your employer to say, actually, there's a real reason, a health reason why I cannot be in the workplace. And that could be something that's incredibly difficult for people to do. And if they're feeling under pressure, then they may be going into the workplace anyway and putting themselves at risk because they feel like they have no choice. Yeah, absolutely. There are great employers out there. And the thing is that there are now global opportunities, because if you want to work from home, you can get a job anywhere in the world right now. That is how it is working. Some employers are really opening up, and actually that incredible diversity that comes from that in terms of, different approaches and cultures coming together and really creating an amazing and more innovative environment to work in, then yes, absolutely look for those opportunities. But not everybody will be brave enough to do that. And they may feel trapped by their financial situation or something like that. So I guess the other side of it is, seek help, go and talk to somebody, share your concerns with somebody. Don't sit at home worrying about it or push yourself to go into the office without going to seek help for your own well-being as well as your employment position.
Awesome. Mary, would you like to add to that, or we can move on to something difference.
We can move on.
Awesome. All right, so I think this is also a good segue for us to move on to something else that's very interesting that's happening in the workplace. I would say it's trending in workplace discussions right now, and that's about something interesting in Spain. Spain recently announced that they would be legislating and making menstrual leave legal. This is of course exciting news, and this is news that has been positively received from different parts of the world. And let's break this down, of course, from a workplace situation, but you know, um, I think there is so much out there that, of course, that can be discussed and broken down and discussed in length. But some of the things are really, really, I would say, personal. And there were a lot of messages coming across ever since I posted this out there on LinkedIn as well. A friend of mine wrote saying, "I have spent days in excruciating pain, crouched beneath the office desk sometimes, feeling really terrible about the fact that I can't work properly, while suffering through that pain with a game face on." And this is going to change all that. So, before we get into this much deeper, just initial thoughts on this and why this is welcoming news to all of us who work with workforce and work.
I think it's fantastic to get rid of a stigma around periods, menstruation, just about half the population. So why it's taboo, and the fact of the matter that women around the globe suffer, and in some cultures suffer horribly every month from just the stigma, let alone the women that have pain associated with it. And so I am all for anything we can do to get rid of taboos is wonderful. I'm not quite sure I think this is the way to go about it. I certainly don't want to stand in the way of anybody, working for women's rights and women's health. I just wonder if it's accomplishing what they hope to accomplish. And of course, in different cultures, the way forward might look different.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think and there is menstrual leave that is quite common in some jurisdictions, especially in South Asia, and even a few parts in Africa actually. But that's interesting you bring that up there about it, because we also did a poll, by the way, on LinkedIn, and it's an interesting poll. There's 63% of people actually said they welcome it. It actually shows that finally putting empathy before sympathy, and they're actually trying to act on all the data and the knowledge that we've gathered for centuries now, of course. But I think there's also this perspective that why does it have to be just excruciating pain, and who actually determines this? Who determines whether it's excruciating pain or not? Why can't it just be a normal sick leave where I can just be by myself and have that day to myself? It doesn't have to be objectively looked at as something that's excruciating pain or not. And this is something that's once again very, very interesting. But I just want to once again share a message that has come to me in the last 2 days, uh, and the person quotes, "This is revolutionary in many ways, as the change in mindset is taking root in the office, but will have rippling changes at home as well. When I stay at home, I can proudly say that my office has given me menstrual leave to rest and energize. Now, this might not be a huge deal for women who have their independence, but for a girl living with, say, many family members, this suddenly feels normal to just lock yourself in a room and rest for the day without any explanations or excuses. So the family and society itself will start falling in line thanks to these workplace changes of sorts. Wanted to know what your thoughts on that as well, because this is, of course, going to influence a much wider awareness and education of society.
Yeah, I think it's really positive in that sense. And, for so many families, it's a subject that isn't discussed. And,
Right.
When you do have excruciating pain, then it's very difficult to get out of bed. Even if you can, you perhaps can't stand up straight. And how do you explain that to somebody who's never had that? So I think there are opportunities there. Absolutely, I love what you said, Mary, about removing the stigma. I'm slightly intrigued, this whole thing about where you can have 3 days a month. because actually what you're probably talking about is something that is not, it's not regimented in that way, particularly if you are suffering and have some sort of issue that is creating the pain. The chances of it falling, very neatly into 3 days a month are probably slim to none. And so I think that's a really important point. And I know this was the article was about Spain, but they were saying, they've got to go and get a doctor's note. Well, if you imagine you can't get out of bed, how are you going to go and see your doctor? Although you might be able to do an online thing, but you don't want to talk to anybody at that point. You just want to curl up and cope with it at that point. So that need to have, the doctor's approval to have those days off as well, it creates a system. So obviously we've got to make there some extent to 5 days. Yeah, it's just the one that I was reading about, the 3 days for Spain. So, but it's that system, isn't it? About it's assuming that it's a very easy thing to legislate for in terms of, well, we'll just put those 3 days a month in. But opening up the subject and helping people to recognise that actually it might not be that tidy, it might not be that simple. It could be every 3 weeks. It could be something that's really quite debilitating, as opposed to something that sometimes is and sometimes isn't. So there is no necessarily any pattern here, but the opening it up as a subject and making people aware of the impact that it can have on some women, not all women, then that's really, really important.
I completely support those messages. I completed my mental health first aid training yesterday, having done two full days of training over the last couple of months. And the reason I'm mentioning that is it was very much about removing those stigmas in relation to mental health, anxiety, depression, and so on and so forth. And also what was really important was the relationship between employees, colleagues, and managers. And to me, this goes back to a couple of really important fundamentals around relationships in the workplace. The first one is about training and supporting our managers to be more compassionate, more empathetic, to be better equipped to be able to listen and engage in dialogue, so they can adapt and flex the workplace to meet the various needs of their teams. And having one simple set of rules for everyone just doesn't make sense to me. It's an anathema. Being able to be flexible and adaptable based on the changing needs and circumstances of our teams, because we know them, we understand them, we have ongoing dialogue, to me is a far more powerful way of addressing some of these issues, whether it's menstruation or any other personal issues in our workplace. So I think really supporting and equipping our managers is key. I guess the second one, really, it talks similar point to the question of hybrid working. What are we measuring here, input or output? What's really important to running a successful organisation is what we can do as employees, individually, collectively, within our organisations to drive business success, whatever that might look like. And I think until we start to reevaluate and rethink what it means to be an employee, to be a member of a team, to be a member of a successful organisation, and that we focus more on what we achieve rather than what we put in, and start measuring the beans going in and start measuring them coming out. And I think the measures of success, in some respects, create quite an acrimonious and adversarial and rigid and bureaucratic space. And I think the successful organisations are rethinking how they measure success, not from the number of hours you put in and whether you're there at 9 o'clock or you have some time to flex because you have childcare needs, or in this case a period or some other factors. It's about what are we doing individually and collectively to drive success. How do we measure success? What does good look like? What are we trying to achieve? So these throw real challenges to our organisations, and legislation and formal policies provide really a sticking plaster, they're a band-aid over a failure of our leaders, managers, HR and others to have really powerful conversations, big conversations within our teams and organisations. So I'm not saying legislation doesn't play a part, because clearly it does to protect hard-won employment rights, but we've got to be better at having conversations about what's really important and removing the taboos and the stigma, as we're thankfully seeing now in the area of mental health and well-being in our workplaces.
And I think the other thing there, sorry, Mary, just about, when people get pulled up on their performance because they've had days off. So actually, if they're legitimately having that time off, then it won't go onto their performance record as well, which is really positive. But outside of work, actually, what it will probably do is actually give women more confidence to go to the doctor and say that this is so bad that I'm having 3 days off every month, 5 days, whatever it is. I think there must be a problem. I need some help here. So hopefully it will open up those because I don't think women do that very much either. So
That's
Mary,
a really good
sorry, I
point.
cut you off. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like that, Jonathan, this idea of, when we make changes in the workplace, how it can ripple out into society. And I just wonder if, and David, I kind of think that you pointed out this, that maybe if we look at chronic health concerns, so, and I think you could have a provision. Let's suppose everybody in the company has 10, 12 days off a year for sick days. But if you have a chronic condition, that, maybe depending on your organization needs to be certified every year or whatever, what the doctors know. That way, Nicki, you don't have to go just because you're having this issue, but you've got that sort of in place, because we want everyone to be gainfully employed. And to say it's unfair somebody gets more sick days might be, well, it's unfair that they're sick, right? It's unfair they have this chronic condition. But I think about putting something in specifically from administration. I just can't imagine going to my boss and saying, this is what's going on with me, because it's personal. Or, especially if you don't have a good relationship with your boss. But even if you do I want my boss tracking my period? And then what if I'm pregnant and I don't want anybody to know? My boss is like, oh, why are you here? What's going on? Or heaven forbid you have some sort of other sort of health problem that you don't want to talk about. But now people are watching you. I mean, I so appreciate the work that people have put in for this bill in Spain and the idea behind it. And there's somebody, Renee Lafleur, Dr. Lafleur at my university, who works to put free period supplies in all of the student bathrooms. And, period poverty is a real issue where people can't even afford the supplies they have. Or to manage just a regular condition. So I think there's a lot that we can do and should do in society to, get rid of stigma and just make it normal, because it is normal. I just worry that this is too invasive for women.
Thank you for that. I think there's also like the minority of people who actually brought this up on the poll as well. There were a few voices who said that privacy is more important and then leave, right? And there was, you also have.
So Jonathan, you're glitching a little bit at the moment. So just let people know, Jonathan's in Goa at the moment with monsoons. The line's a bit challenging there, Jonathan, but you were just glitching, so we lost some of that just to kind of come back in, and you were summarizing.
Yeah, so I think just to follow up on what Mary was saying about the privacy perspective to things, and a lot of people said, why don't you just call it sick leave? Why do we have to label it as menstrual leave? Because you also have trans men who menstruate, you have men and women who get into menopause, and you brought up the pregnancy aspect as well. And so the idea of just calling it sick leave and respecting sick leave and the privacy of that is something that is also a preference to a lot of people who hold in on the opinion over there. There's also another perspective, and that's actually the banner out there about productive periods. But I also got a lot of messages from friends who said that we have learned to deal with this right from the time of our early teens, and we will deal with this. But more than just leave, if we just had a chance to be in a comfortable place where we could use our own washroom and our own kitchen, and be at our own, say, on our own couch and work, that would do it. And we really didn't have to take leave, because not all of us go through excruciating pain. And so the idea, and a lot of people also kind of fold in to say that, why can't this be a good reason to have a hybrid model in place where you can opt out for an online work day whenever needed. So I wanted to know what are your thoughts on that as well, because this is kind of connected to our first topic as well. We were talking about the future of the workspace, and another reason why the hybrid working model makes a lot of sense.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because actually, if you've got chronic pain, then you're not going to take a hybrid day because you're not going to be able to work. And I think that's, they're the people that we're really talking about here. You can have pain where you can, work from home and it'll be more comfortable for you. But that's not really, I don't think, what this is about. This is about the people with the chronic pain. It's a really interesting point actually just come up in the chat about would this create a bias against hiring women and LGBTQ plus employees, knowing that more leave days are to be given. And I think that's a really interesting point. But then not all women are going to take them. Not all women are going to need them. This is not, we're talking about, we mentioned about half the population, but not all of them suffer with chronic pain. So, a lot of people will not actually use these. And I think what we're talking about, and it goes back to that point of we're just talking about somebody has chronic pain. They have a condition that creates chronic pain for them, and therefore they need some time off work. So why are we considering that to be any different for period pain than we are if it was arthritic pain that had flared up or something like that? There are different reasons why people might need to take time out. So why not change the terminology a little bit and say this is about, recognizing that people have flare-ups of chronic pain for many different reasons. And actually, sometimes you just need to take a time out, and it may be incredibly personal to you, but you don't want to share that with your employer.
It is a really interesting point that you raised. I think it's a great question. It's a great point in relation to employers hiring more women and LGBTQ plus employees. And again, it just feels like we're looking at this down the wrong end of the telescope to an extent. It's almost seeing these issues, these very human issues, as being problems that have to be dealt with through some form of policy or process. And if we look at this as a strength of the organisation, really engaging with people as human beings and everything that we are, which is we're animals, we're physical beings with needs and goals and real challenges. And the organisations, the smart organisations, listening and engaging with those people as human beings. I don't know, and I'd love to know if there's more evidence. Maybe, Jonathan, this is some work we should be doing. But are you likely to retain that talent for longer? Are those individuals likely to put more discretionary effort in when they do feel able to do so? Are they more likely to choose to work with you because you're an employer who takes this stuff seriously? So rather than seeing it as a problem that should be managed through a process and is it fairly and equitably done in terms of people having more sick leave than others, to me feels like it's another attempt to use policy and procedure to tackle a human problem. And yet again, we find it doesn't work because we're not boxes. We can't put ourselves in boxes. And that positive engagement, and Jem, you talked about that in the chat function, that positive engagement and listening to the needs of our individual employees is a starting point. And perhaps we do need to do more work to understand the really positive business benefits that comes from that, not just for the human beings that work in the organisation, but in terms of measured in terms of business productivity, shareholder value, stakeholder value, social value as measures of output. And until we can do that, we'll always see these as problems that we have to try and manage in this slightly binary or oppositional way. And it feels like we're missing an opportunity there to think about this not as a problem, but a real opportunity to help people to work in our organisations and thrive. So it sounds maybe a little idealistic, forgive me for doing so, but it perhaps does require a different way of looking at this, not as a problem, but as a wonderful opportunity to be a truly inclusive employer where people can shine, and that delivers real business benefit and real business outcomes. And reframing the problem will help us to reframe those solutions potentially.
On the theme of creating this happy, harmonious, healthy workspaces, I think it's a good time to kind of wrap up today's conversation about hybrid working spaces by getting into something that's a bit more, I would say, something that all of us can relate to at some stage in our lives. Hopefully, we are all, at least on this panel, in a workspace that we like our colleagues. But we've all been there at some stage. We've been in the workplace where we just probably did not want to socialize, and we've got used to socializing or networking virtually in the online world. And now with the office culture coming back, now with folks like Musk saying that you need to get back to the office, and of course there are a lot of other corporates as well pulling in their workforces. Um, is mandatory socializing back. And I think the pandemic has made us so much aware about mental health and the importance of mental health, and how things that we took for granted earlier are now suddenly becoming more and more important and key to a successful, productive, effective workforce. And yeah, so I'm just wondering how leaders, management personnel have to deal with this, how HR needs to deal with this. Because at the end of the day, it was the HR who used to always send us that email saying, hey, tomorrow evening there's a party downstairs and you've got to be there. And so I think, but HR has also got more aware now. It's something that has, at the end of the day, has to be a voluntary activity. But just from your feedback that you are receiving from people that you converse with on a daily basis, how are they tackling this, and how have they tackled, say, networking and socializing in the online world?
And I love a party, Jonathan, but I don't love being told I have to go to a party. And I don't like the idea of having to tell others that they should be doing so either. So to me, the ability to socialize and engage with each other and interact with each other in a social environment, fantastic. We took our team off to Thorpe Park, a pleasure centre. I talked with lots of scary rides and stuff last Friday just to bring us together as a team. People could opt in or opt out as they wish, but it was a lot of fun. But the idea of making it mandatory and a requirement, no. But I'm a big fan of the fellowship that comes from the workplace. We are, after all, as we've said earlier, social animals, and we can get a lot from that camaraderie and fellowship, but we can't mandate it. And to do so is very exclusive as well. If people don't want to be wearing funny hats and drinking wine, there's no glasses of juice there. What about people who don't drink alcohol? So all of those debates and discussions start to come back to the surface. So I think the right way of doing it is creating spaces whereby we can socialise and we can engage with each other. But it's much more flexible and nuanced than forcing people to come to parties that they probably can think of many things they prefer to do.
Yeah, I think there's a problem in an organization if you think, okay, well, we need to have team building, we need to have a strong team, so we're going to have a holiday party and we're going to do this summer, whatever. And okay, so we have a good culture. It doesn't work that way. It's got to work the other way, where managers and just everyday employees have given space every day, every week to be human with each other and to build those relationships. And there's so many different ways you could do team building so that if after hour socializing happens, it's organic and people want to be there or can be there, and can and want can change all the time. People have families, they have different circumstances that go on. And so making those organic spaces that happen takes real attention to the particularity of the individuals there. It takes real leadership investing in every interaction as an opportunity to grow and learn and be a better team together.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, getting to know the people that you work with and understanding that those priorities are different. But also, there are things, people will have social anxiety as well. And particularly if they've been at home for 2 years and then get told to go back out and socialise. But the other aspect to that, okay, there's the party, you have to be there. But when we get to the more organic socialising, then actually make sure that you're not excluding anybody. Make sure that everybody is being invited, but accept if they don't want to attend. And, that's a big difference between mandatory. But for some people, if they're excluded on a regular basis, then that will lead to a real feeling of isolation. And, it brings up an opportunity for a bullying complaint when they feel they're being pushed out. So there are all sorts of different aspects to consider here. But I'm the same as you, David. Love a party, but don't tell me I have to go.
it spoils it. Another one, I mean, what will HR become? The fun police in our organisations, you know. So, and I think if we talk about the emergence of a very modern people and culture function, rather than being the fun police and, you know, applying policies as to is fun being dished out in an equitable and fair way and in a proper way, actually being an enabler. So, you know, wouldn't it be great if our people and culture functions had the tools around facilitation, mediation, building collaborative spaces and crafting environments whereby we can come together, so we can see the people and culture function really as an enabler of a really creative workspace in this hybrid environment, which is what we've been talking about, rather than necessarily looking at policies and procedures about who's having more fun than so on, and should we or should we not have a party. So I think it's a chance again to rethink some of the perhaps the traditional systems and processes that we've deployed, and for the people function as a whole to become that enabler of collaborative dialogue and these kind of situations, social situations within our organisations, and team building.
Yeah, don't rush off to write your party policy.
Yeah, have you ever seen a party? Can you imagine that? I'm sure someone somewhere in their employee handbook must have a party policy. But that's definitely one for the shredder in my humble.
Yeah.
From what I'm hearing is that I think David, Nicki, and Mary can easily relate to 3 of the 4 people in the picture, the ones wearing the yellow hat and the red hat. But what if you are the person in the purple hat there? You know, what if you really do not want to go? And I think I would kind of want to wrap up this conversation today for a lot of people who probably are listening in, and viewers who will be listening in the future, about how do you deal with this situation where you just don't want to go there, and for whatever reason. And there's a very nice piece written by Rebecca Reed in the Menstrual, where she says, if you do get wind that your colleagues are thinking about you being unfriendly or are just hurt with the fact that you did not turn up, then go out there and address it, and go out there and share with them that it is not personal and it is not something that is purposeful. And so to the 3 of you, how would you advise this person to handle this situation? What's the right environment? What's the right space you create before you have this kind of a point? Because there is already a bit of awkwardness because of the fact that, you know, the person in the purple hat did not turn up. But and how do you address this?
This is a really interesting one for me as a coach. I think about this in terms of actually it's their problem, not my problem, and therefore actually I shouldn't have to explain myself to them. And there should be a level of, if somebody says no, that you accept it. You don't. We're very much drawn into this having to explain ourselves all the time, instead of people just accepting a no, thank you, I won't be there. And I think that is really interesting. However, if there were good relationships in that team, they would probably have been curious about each other. They would probably know that perhaps that person has a family, or, you know, they don't enjoy going out. They're quite introverted. They prefer to go home and wind down. You would think that those relationships would have been built. And so then you start to look at that from a different perspective and say, actually, what is it about those people who are gossiping about you and talking about you behind your back, and not just accepting your answer? And why is that behaviour happening in the first place?
I think it's and also think about the idea of having to go out and then being judged for not doing something. I think if you look at some of the stuff from Engage for Success, certainly pre the pandemic, it was sort of less than 30% of our workforce feel engaged in the workplace at any moment in time. So the idea of going out for those kind of events, driving engagement and being a positive contributor to good work and a good workplace, I think is a bit of an anathema. I don't think it's the case. I think developing an environment based on the needs, and kind of going back to some of the conversations earlier, what does that person who's not wanting to be participating, what do they need? What would they like to be able to do? What's important to them, and having good quality conversations around what's really important, and then shaping activities and events within the workplace that meets as much as we can the needs of a very diverse range of organisational stakeholders, colleagues, and others. So I think, again, it goes back to some of the rooted in some of the points that have come through from today's At Pace videocast. Really, it's about the dialogue, listening, identifying needs, not prejudging, and creating a space, a really powerful space for us to be the best and most brilliant version of us. And that, to me, I think it's almost thematic through all of those points, Jonathan.
Absolutely. Any closing comments then, Mary?
I want to say something about what Nicki just said. I think, so if you see somebody who's not participating, being curious, we can be curious without being nosy, but, curious and kind, insofar as we care for the people around us. And we see that somebody isn't participating, saying, is there something I can do? Or, the person they don't have to open up to you, but insofar as we really care about the people around us, we can look around and say, who is this working for? What are the kinds of things are we achieving our goal of helping us being a more cohesive work environment, right? Isn't that what we're trying to do here? Is it doing it? Is it only doing it for 30% of the people? But being curious and then acting on that curiosity so that we make our workplaces more fair, just, inclusive, right? Sustaining and high performing. That's what we want to do. And that's about listening and being curious to all the people around us.
That's so well put, Mary. I think it all comes down to what we've also learned as conflict resolution and mediation professionals, that empathy is more of listening, to be curious to understand than to judge. And that's the difference. And I guess that's the message. We had 3 interesting topics that we tried to break down on our first episode of the At Pace talk show. We're going to have more of these. We hope that you can join us for all of these that are coming up. We will notify you on LinkedIn and on the website, so keep a lookout for those. Thank you so much, David, Nicki, Mary. This was a pleasure.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well done, our first one.
That's right.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Good to be part of it.